So today I'm going to be talking about getting your name out there in the community through both Facebook and more traditional media routes, and why that's valuable. I mean, we say that it seems pretty self-evident, but sometimes I think it's important to reflect on who we're trying to reach, why we're trying to reach them, so that we can then decide how best to reach them. So I will share my screen here. One, please. Perfect. Do you all see a PowerPoint in front of you? I see nods. Robin's giving me a thumbs up. Yes. Perfect. So today we're talking about CPF in the news. One of my favorite parts of my job is I get all these Google alerts from any time Canadian Parents for French immersion, or other buzzwords that we have pop up in local media coverage online. And I love to share those stories on our provincial Facebook page, and it can be anything from a concours winner in Saanich to advocacy efforts in Burns Lake. It's really nice to be able to share those across our whole network to showcase what people are doing in their communities. There are obviously many ways that chapters get their names out there. To use the example of CPF Burns Lake again, they've been taking out ads in their local newspaper to rally support because one of their programs is being threatened with being cut right now, as well as doing some other measures. Other chapters use Facebook to show off their events, that advertise their events beforehand, and show off the photos and results of those events afterwards. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about different routes to getting your chapter's name out there. So obviously, we're looking for exposure when we get ourselves out there. It seems pretty fundamental, but we need to understand our goals of any exposure activity in order to best craft it. So exposure can bring us a number of things. The first being funding, often a key metric for grants, is the reach of your event or project, and increasing your recognition by getting your name out there and showing off how you're using your money. It can be encouraging to funders. Another important reason, or way to get exposure, is with photos. So you use your photos in posts to get exposure. In turn, you can often get more photos through exposure. And we'll talk about this a bit later. But when we have in-person events again, be sure to invite your local reporters because they love pictures. They're often understaffed and sometimes looking for a way to fill a big space on a page. And nothing much is better than that, than a bonhomme carnaval and a few kids eating maple taffy, for example. They'll be excited to see people in person again. And I think that as our world gradually opens up, reporters will be keen to show off lots of people pictures. And often with community newspapers in particular, they'll probably be keen to share their pictures with you again afterwards. You might even be able to use them on Facebook with credit. So you'll be getting good quality photos to then share again across your networks. Going off what Nancy talked about last night and the near crisis of the Saanich chapter in the 90s, we learned the importance of steady recruitment. So by steadily reminding folks that we exist and of what you're doing, you're keeping CPF front and center in their minds. So you get followers who then maybe some of them turn into volunteers and executive members. Another thing more broadly, what we're looking for with exposure is community support. So take what CPF Burns Lake is doing right now. Last year, their district was advised in an external report to axe an immersion program at their local elementary school, citing, among other things, consistent drop in kindergarten registration. So they've spent the last many months drumming up support. They've gotten stories in the local newspaper, they've taken out ads, and they've approached parents of young kids asking for letters of intent, saying that they're willing to sign their kids up for French immersion in the future. That job is a lot easier to do if people already know who you are and what you do in the community. So This goes to what John was talking about earlier. It's a lot easier to do this if people know who you are before you're in a time of crisis. If they hear about us in the good times, then they'll be much more likely to support us when things are going a bit rougher or when we're rallying an advocacy effort. Another thing that exposure allows us to do is to show off. By sharing photos, events, and accomplishments on Facebook or in the newspaper, it's a great way to showcase what you've done. For community members, neighbors, grandparents, extended family reading the newspaper or online, it's neat to see what's going on in your community. And finally, we have to remember why we're doing this. This is the ultimate reason, is to celebrate our students. One of my favorite times of the year is the May-June period, where I'm sending out press releases to local media about provincial and national concours winners from those towns, because those almost always get picked up in those communities by newspapers. And it's really exciting to celebrate these big successes of these students. Yeah, the great local news story is area child wins Canadian French public speaking competition. It's always very exciting. So there are lots of ways to get exposure, and depending on what we're trying to do, we can pick the best method that's available to us. So when we're trying to get ourselves out there, we have to consider who we're trying to reach and why. So depending on what we're doing, we can reach kids, parents, educators, decision makers, or the community at large. Considering your audience is going to inform what forum you use and how you choose it. For example, you may not use a newspaper to reach kids. Instead, you might use an in-class presentation. Community at large might not be targeted through sharing just through your chapter's Facebook page, but a newspaper story or an ad could be effective, for example. Now we'll talk a little bit about Facebook. So the key to success on Facebook is largely visual. So images and videos are key. Facebook, your audience is likely to be parents or the community at large if your parents are then sharing, and only if your parents and followers are sharing along with their friends. But it is still good for many things. It's good for creating excitement about upcoming events. Facebook, you can obviously make a Facebook event for something like Carnaval, or in the future, more public-facing things like your local concours. You can share your successes on there. So like your pictures of your local concours winners, and reach new people to then directly engage, hopefully through your own followers sharing. Facebook in general, it's a likely way to reach parents. It's pretty efficient for targeting specific people after face-to-face and word of mouth, which I think we've understood time and time again still work best. A little tougher these days though, but we're seeing successes still. Your Facebook page in general is a good sustained reminder to the community, to your members, to your more passive members especially, that you exist, that you're offering valuable connections and resources, and it showcases your ongoing presence in the community. Local news is the other way to get your, or is another way, not the other way. Local news is another way to get yourselves out there. And just like John was talking about earlier, it's also very important to build that relationship with your local newspaper editor or reporter. Sometimes they're one and the same. And who reads the newspaper? The community at large, decision makers. And it's often, I mean, we're all on community Facebook pages of various levels of repute. And often I find something in the newspaper has a little bit more weight to it, perhaps, than someone saying something in a community Facebook page, which is perhaps for the best, especially when we're looking for support for advocacy measures. So building that relationship is key for local news for a few reasons, and we'll talk about these. So eventually you want to get to the point where you can ring up or email your local reporter, say, hey, like the situation in Burns Lake. Hopefully we won't get there, but our program is under threat. This, and this. We'd like to talk to you about it. But before you get there, you need to know that person first. So we'll talk about this. Local newsrooms are often understaffed. For example, I can speak from personal experience. I was a reporter in rural BC for about a year and a half. I was the solo editor reporter who covered an area that was about a 2-hour drive from one end to the other. So I had to plan my events at least 2 to 3 days in advance so that I wasn't burning gas all the time and never working. Emails or calls on the day of something are not particularly effective. However, if I knew you beforehand and we'd met or we'd talked and I knew your organization existed, then chances are I would have already been tuned in to what you were working on. And then when big things come up, I would have been more likely to be there. Yeah, like John was talking about earlier, it's so much easier to get support or coverage if you have name recognition and community presence. So it's really important to, even when there's nothing big going on, to meet with your local reporter or send them an email, introduce yourself, tell them about the public interest things that you do, even if nothing's going on right away. So let them know that Concours is coming up in the springtime, Carnaval is coming up in February, or other events that you might host, just so that those are on their radar for when they do come up. When important stories do come up, there are a few ways to get them in the newspaper. The first thing, obviously, call or email your friendly reporter. Hopefully you know them by now. Invite them. Again, this is looking forward, hopefully, to next year. But even online things, I found as a reporter, I was in Grand Forks at the beginning of COVID, and I was joining a lot of virtual things like virtual choir performances. And there's a new novelty in covering a story like that. So covering something like Concours Virtuel will be quite interesting this year for news reporters. Invite them and give them an idea of why they should be there. Just like John was talking about, when you approach decision makers, make sure they know why you're talking to them. You're not just talking to them to say, after second introduction, to say, here we are, and then don't leave it to them to figure out how they can help you. Same thing with a reporter. Try and focus your story, if you will, as to why this would be interesting to put in the local newspaper. Our kids are doing great work and are part of this national competition. That's fantastic, particularly when we're looking for a local angle on something. Oftentimes, because local newsrooms are understaffed, reporters might not be able to make it to everything you do, and that's okay, because a reporter's second favorite friend is submitted photos. So these are things from your events where if they couldn't make it to, but if they see your name pop up in their email inbox with 4 photo attachments and some names of people in them, some details of that event, they're going to be infinitely grateful, because photos are wonderful in a newspaper. That's what draws people's eyes. So if you can share that sort of content, it's fantastic for reporters to plug into the newspaper, and it keeps your own name up and up in the public discussion, which kind of brings us back to exposure. So now, once you've got your exposure, perhaps this feeds your chain of funding. It augments the amount of photos you have. It reaches new followers. It gains more support. It shows off what you've been doing, and it celebrates. So we kind of have this circle of, you need one thing to get to the next, from funding to photos to followers, but they feed each other in the end. So once we have one thing, it's kind of an infinite loop, or ideally an infinite loop if we keep it humming along. This was sort of meant to be an overview of how, like John was breaking down the process of getting in touch with local decision makers. the aim of this presentation was really to break down the process of how to get your name and your photos and your events into the public discussion in your community, perhaps beyond just your local Facebook page or your local community Facebook groups. So that's why starting in February, I'll be helping all chapters who don't have public-facing Facebook pages to create them and to start populating them so that we can start building those followers and photos so that we can then reach out when we need help to boost our message, to boost our events, to boost our celebrations of our students. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll be quite happy to answer any questions. This is another great, it doesn't really involve getting your name out there in your own public sphere, but in terms of Facebook pages, what it's allowed us to see more in real time is what chapters are doing right now. So for example, I'll take CPF Castlegar in December did a really cute treasure hunt sort of thing where they had a Bonhomme Carnaval costume and took pictures of Bonhomme in the city in different spots around Castlegar and posted them on their Facebook page, and families could weigh in, guess where Bonhomme was today. And it was a nice way to keep families, to keep kids engaged in a very COVID-friendly way.
Jensen, there was a question in the chat box about contests on Facebook. Any tips, ideas?
I'm trying to find this question in the chat box. I see, kombucha. There we are. Any tips on how to hold contests? Our Facebook attempts were a flop. We've never run a Facebook specific contest from the branch level. We've run them through our more member or volunteers geared. But Devin, I'll be quite happy to chat with you after about maybe lessons learned from the flops of the contest. What, if you don't mind sharing, what was the premise of your contest that you tried?
Oh, hi. Yeah, well, we tried 2 different contests. So we had one that was geared at primary students, and I just posted a trivia question. And we were trying to give away basically the stuff we got from the last conference. So like the tote bags, the toques, that was our prize pack. I posted pictures of the prize packs and some books that I had. And over the course of the 3 weeks, we had 1 person enter. So they won, so that was great. But yeah, there were like no other responses other than a handful of likes from, I think, someone like a CPF national director or something liked the post, but that was about it. And then I done a second one, intermediate, which was based on what I was doing in my classroom, Combat des Tunes. So like we posted 2 music videos and asked the kids to vote for their favorite one. And there were like 0, like just crickets. So I was just wondering if you have tips, like, or if other chapters have done things for contests that maybe don't rely on Facebook, because I think it's just parents on Facebook, kids aren't on Facebook. And so just wondering if other groups have suggestions on how they've run contests.
I do think like Facebook requires sort of a critical mass to get it out there. And CPF Vancouver's Facebook page and chapter, you guys are pretty young. So I think obviously having more followers helps, but also if you're able to share those sorts of contests in school pack Facebook groups as well, might be another way to get traction beyond yourselves. Because yeah, the difficulty with Facebook, if we just share on our own page all the time, is that pretty much only our current followers will see it. The challenge is to then recruit new ones. So that's when we rely on our own people to share into those other groups and into those community groups to broaden our connection. I saw, was it Kimberly or Nikki posted? Kimberly posted in the chat about sponsoring Facebook posts as well. So like she said, $25 does go a long way. And I can certainly help with targeting those to people between the ages of if you're looking for parents, people between the ages of what, 35 and 50, who live in this area, who are interested in this and this sort of thing, that might be another way to reach more folks in Vancouver. And if the chapter does have a little bit of wiggle room with money, that's a nice option. Nikki here is saying, we sponsored $10 for 1 week of the alumni videos. It's just another way to get reach. Nikki, do you mind sharing about maybe why you sponsored those videos, and how did you target your audience?
Actually, I did it by accident. The very first one was by accident. And I was like, uh-oh, I'm like, how is it going to pay for it? And it just took it off my credit card. So I was like, oh, well, that's how it pays for it. And then and then we started, so we have been reaching out to all the students that have graduated from the French immersion program and have asked them to submit videos of themselves and how French immersion has helped them move on further. And because we're in a small community, we know a lot of the families, and I may have put a few of them through daycare, but so I was able to twist a little harder. We gave them $50 stipends for their videos, and we were able to do that through our poinsettia fundraiser, and we did a big competition for a poinsettia fundraiser, and it was very successful this year. So that's how we were able to pay for the $10 a day, but or $10 a sponsorship. But it's pretty self-explanatory. I haven't really reached out to, I try and hit the 18 to older group only simply because I'm trying to reach parents and get them to enroll their children in there. So I'm not trying to reach the younger crowd at the moment, but I can't believe how many people that are on Facebook that have responded to the videos that I didn't even know existed. So it's far reaching, better than I expected.
And do you have all these videos on your Facebook page now?
I have 7 alumni videos now.
Send us a link to your Facebook.
When did I'm sorry?
Can you send the link on your Facebook? Yes. Oh, that would be great.
Maybe Jensen could, because that's about the extent of my I always say, and I've said it to Jensen many times, I'm like, I manage a daycare, and I have I'm really good at taking care of kids, but accounting and computers, I'm pretty low on.
That's okay.
One nice thing about having all of the Facebook pages set up for chapters is that all the chapters will be able to follow all the other chapters too. Like, it should be pretty easy to just go and follow, and then you'll have other chapters content to share as well. And Chris, I think there was a question a little bit earlier that you asked. And in terms of, like, Jensen has been making these shareables that are at the bottom of the chapter updates every month. So you can just share those directly or pretty easily onto your page as well. So we're trying to make it like a bit more easy to get content out there.
That was another thing that I tried to do, is stay up on it, is at least once a week share another video or some sort of information.
Yeah, I mean, managing a Facebook page can be as much work or as little work as you want. You could turn it into a full-time job if you wanted to, but I really don't think anyone does want to. We all stare at our phones enough as it is. So here's a chapter update that went out recently. This is the January one. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we get to some social media shareables. So there's normally between 3 and 5 bullet points. This week we're talking about, because we're still trying to expand our tutoring program as much as possible, we're asking chapters to share the application form to be a tutor with our volunteer tutor program. So that we have been targeting to, among other people, high school seniors, because it's a great way for them to get their necessary volunteer hours while also kind of tangentially working on their homework by refining their own language skills at the same time. Concours Virtuel is coming back, so it's a great time to dig up some of those, I can't believe it, old videos. Can't believe they're already 10 months old. This is a little absurd. To share and kind of get that spirit back for this coming season. And then finally, we've been working with the ACUFC to really promote their bursaries program, because there are some great deals for bilingual students going to universities in Canada and learning French or doing their degrees in French. They can get some pretty significant scholarships from schools like Simon Fraser University for pursuing their studies there. So the next chapter update in February will have likely 2 to 3 different shareables that chapters are encouraged to click through and share. You can even share what other folks are doing. So share what Kimberly's been up to in CPF South Caribou, where they've actually gone on and taken it a step further and made their own tutoring program to help local parents and employ local students, right, Kimberly? Can anyone explain what sponsoring means? Yes. So if you don't have Facebook, you might not see it. I don't know if you have Instagram or Twitter, but on all these social media platforms, there's natural content, which is just what my friends posted on Facebook or what organizations I follow posted on Facebook. And then there's sponsored content, which for me, because I've been looking at coffee tables recently, is just full of furniture, all way outside of my affordability. But so these are ads that companies have taken out and have targeted people who have, people like me, who have either visited certain websites or are interested in certain things as explained by their Facebook profiles. It's creepy on the back end when you realize just how specific you can target people, but very effective as well. I did recently buy a coffee table that way, so it works.